Yes, I'm back on that Sony TC854, the one I worked on last week that had the bent spindle because the owner dropped it. Well, there's another problem that I found out after speaking to them, and that is that the sound fades away after it's run 30 to 40 minutes. So this is going to be an interesting one because you stop it and start it up again and the sound is back for another 30 to 40 minutes. It's going to be a fun one. Let's check it out. You guys remember this thing, right? The one that got dropped. The one I fixed like a year or earlier in the year. The connector was broken on and then it came back dropped. And the owner of it, I was talking to them, they said that it stops playing. It just, the sound just cuts out. So I've run a couple tapes through, and I've run them through like 3 times now, and I haven't heard it cut out. So I can't just sit around here rewinding this thing all the time. So I'm going to do make myself up a little loop tape, and I'm going to record something on here, and then I can just let it play, and it'll play forever. It's gotta. And if I throw this on here, I should be able to get this thing just to go forever. So I'm going to record some tones on here. It's going to tighten up a bit and record some tones, and then I can let this thing just play and see how long it runs. Okay, I can just leave this thing now. I've just recorded tones on all 4 tracks, and I can play it at any speed. Play it at 3 3/4 or 7.5 or 15 IPS. I might as well just leave it at the slower speed, and I'm just going to let this thing just leave it run, and then I can just leave this thing just run for hours and hours, and I'm going to leave it run all night. Hopefully my splice won't let go. This is just a piece of just garbage tape that I found, so that's why it sounds so bad. The tape's got creases in it, and all the splice that I did on there is not really the greatest splice in the world. I'm gonna let this thing run and just leave it run all night, and we'll see how much of the oxide comes off and ends up on the heads and everything else. But at least this way I can let this thing run and basically bake all night, and we'll see whether it's still doing this in the morning, because I did put a regular tape on it. I just ran a tape through twice, like both sides. So I ran it for like 3 hours, and it didn't cut out. So this is the next step. I don't have to be here to keep flipping the tape over. I can just let the thing play and see whether the sound is cutting out, because the customer's complaint is that they listen to it for half an hour or so and then the sound just goes away. So we'll see whether the sound goes away. So I pulled the unit apart just so I can monitor it, so that when it does finally cut out, we can check some voltages and so forth. So what I've done is I've just done some voltage measurements while the unit's operational, and I'm just going to have to wait until this thing shuts down again. I'll just leave the tone playing. I got other stuff to do, so I'll just leave it playing. I thought it had faded out there, or there was no sound there, and then I realized that this thing's been looping all day, and the head was clogged. And the tape oxide had shredded and clogged the head. I was wondering, why is the sound so low? And then I realized the head was dirty. So I cleaned the head, and we'll just let this thing continue and see if it shuts down, see if it gets quiet again. Something on this board, I'm sure, is where the fault is. An intermittent transistor or something is going bad, but all I can do is just leave it sit until it does it again, and then we'll do the voltage measurements. At that point, we'll make another set of measurements off this board and see if any of these have changed. That way it'll kind of point me to what circuitry I need to look at on the schematic. So this is the working, I'll draw a box around there. So this is the working, my pen's running out of ink, test. And then we'll do another one and measure the same voltages from the same pins and see when it does act up, whether it's the voltages are different, and that will certainly tell me if it's a problem. This is the regulator board, this one here, so this is all we can do, is just let the thing run until it faults. That's the problem with intermittents. When they're not acting up, you can't do anything, right? When they're functional, you can't find a problem. It has to fault, and this can take hours. So my sound has faded out, and I've been just checking the voltages here, and I found a few that there's off, like quite a bit. Like one that measured 0.02 is now measuring 15.7. That's off of, which one is that off of here? Well, that one was right, 22. That one was right, 20.6. This one was 0, which is 0. And the next one over here, okay, now it's measuring 0, but I know I measured 5.3. But this one here, again, now it's gone back down to where it was. But I just measured this, and it was up at 11 volts. What gives? Weird. Weird. I just measured that, like off camera a minute ago. As soon as this thing cut out. One. Next one over here should be 0.1, which it is. 0.5, which it is. Next one should be 0.8. See, these are correct. 0.6. 30.3, it's close enough. 23.2, that's right. 0.1. This one I expect to see 20, which I do. I should see 0.1 on here. Should see 0. 0. 0.1. 0.1, that's right. 0.7, that's right. 0.1 should be the next one. These are all, with the exception of this one over here, which was the fourth one over. And of course now it's measuring correct, but I did measure a higher voltage there a minute ago. Other than that, these are all the same. Observe, it's cut out. Back. I'm wondering if it's a switch. I'm wondering if it's a mechanical switch somewhere that's causing this to cut out. I have to investigate that avenue now. The voltages are all correct when it goes out, but the playback circuits go off. If I switch over to the record head for playback, they're there. The playback circuits are gone out. So I'm just going to try something when it goes out again. Anyway, now I got to let it run for like another half an hour before it'll do it again. But just stopping it and starting it restores it, which says it's not a transistor that's overheating. We got a mechanical problem on this. We have a switch or something that's foobar or a relay or something that's not quite right. Wow, this is interesting. When it's got no sound, I unplugged the head from this head connector that's obviously been replaced, because this is the one I cut this off and hardwired it directly, and this has been obviously put back on. When I bring my finger anywhere near here, I get full deflection on the meter. When I plug the head back in, I get nothing. I wonder if it's the this connector up here that's bad. I wonder if that one's gone bad on it. I don't hear any sound. If I stop it, start it again, I get it. Right? Weird, a really weird problem. But when I unplug the head and bring my fingers near the input, I've got full deflection on the meters and have hum. So the head amplifier is working. Also, when I switch it into synchronous mode, when it uses the record head as a playback, I have sound. It's only when it's on the playback side that I don't. I'm just going to remove the head bracket assembly. We'll check that other connector and see by chance it's gone bad. I mean, this just doesn't make any sense. All the voltages on the preamp board are correct. Like all the voltages coming off the power supply are correct. And yet the sound just fades out. I wonder if this one's bad, this connector. See, I mean, even when it's not playing, the amplifier works. Yet once it's been playing for a while, it stops. So the amplifiers are working. I mean, I guess I could just remove this and put it in play. We'll hold that up. Put it in play and just let it sit there and see whether the amplifier's cut out with no head plugged in. This thing ran through there so much that the tape itself was worn right out completely. So we'll just let this thing sit idling like this with the head block unplugged. It's weird that it would just think of how the oxide that came off that tape just the time I was running it. It just pile of brown oxide on here. Looks like there is a crack right there too. Look at that. That looks like that's a crack in that connector right there. You don't see it on the other side. That would explain why I can squeeze it together. Why anybody would go and put a connector back on that I removed because it was broken, and that's what I think happened on this, is they went and replaced that connector. Why anybody would put another connector on, which is just adding another point of failure. It's one thing with the edge connector up here. Obviously it has to be there because you're able to change from a two-track to a four-track head and half-track head and so forth. So this one kind of has to be a connector to change the two different head blocks, but the other one doesn't have to be a connector. It was just put there for Sony's ease in assembling. But why anybody would put a connector back on after the original one had failed, because it's just an added point of failure. If this goes away, if the induction goes away and the meters don't move, when I don't even have to touch it because the amplifiers are pretty sensitive. If that goes away, then there's still an electrical problem. But if that stays like that, then we might be looking more at a mechanical problem on this. The schematic doesn't help much because of the way it's been broken up. I'm going to have to print it on a half-decent printer that I can actually see and try to line them up, because it jumps from one schematic to another. Trying to trace anything through this is just a real pain in the ass because of the way it was scanned. It was originally was a long-form schematic that you could fold out. Someone scanned it in small sections which you have to stick together. But trying to print it on my printer that I've got here, it's just the print quality is just not good enough to really even see what you're doing. Right? I mean, the scan isn't very good to begin with, but the print quality is terrible. And that could just be my printer is on its last legs. It's an old laser printer that I've had for years. I don't want to knock sites like Hi-Fi Engine because I think they do a great job trying to archive this stuff. But you know, as far as I'm concerned, and I think many others, if you can't have a readable print, then why the hell do you bother even putting it up? Now, I was blaming my old worn-out printer with giving me bad quality prints that I couldn't read. I just went down to the local Staples and spent a couple $100 on a brand new 1200 DPI laser printer and installed the drivers for it. And I still can't read the goddamn schematic. Absolute joke. You know, I'm trying to chase down electrons and I can't see what I'm looking at because the prints that are out there are of such poor quality that you just can't read the goddamn things. It's very frustrating when you're trying to look at a schematic and you can't follow anything through because whoever scanned it didn't scan it at high enough resolution or whatever. But I mean, it's kind of useless. You might as well not even have the schematic when you can't read the numbers that are on it. And even if I zoom in the camera, you know, I mean, that is, you know, I mean, it's like, this is ridiculous. And yet we're expected to work off this crap. And barely, yeah, what is this? This is an NPN or a PNP transistor, right? And you can tell that's an NPN and that's an NPN, but what is this one? I mean, it's just, that's an NPN, but I mean, the print quality is just so bloody bad on so many of these schematics. It's just impossible to read them. And just waste more time trying to figure out what's going on a circuit when you can't read the print. Well, this thing's been sitting for an hour because it sat here running the entire time I went down to Staples and bought the new printer and installed the drivers. And if I bring my finger anywhere near here, I'm still getting deflection. I'm not touching it. If I go to the side where the contacts are, right? So, I don't know whether it's in a mute or what, but I thought I saw higher deflection when I just had my hand near it before, not actually touching it. Just go to stop and see what happens. See if this pops up when it goes into stop. And it does. So, see? So this has a problem because I'm getting deflection in stop. When it's been sitting in play for a while, it almost like it's muting the audio circuit. It'll be fine for now, and if I leave it for 45 minutes to an hour, it'll lose sensitivity on the preamp. And that's why I need to be able to read the schematic so I can see what the hell's going on. What is changing when it's in play versus when it's in stop or any other mode? And why is it changing? It's a playback amplifier. Nothing should be changing. It's a 3-head machine. Nothing should be changing between the modes. It shouldn't matter whether it's in play or it's in stop. You know, maybe the tape selector switch down here is changing something for the equalization. I mean, it's like, it's such a bizarre problem. It's got to be something. I think this is the tape selector switch here on the schematic. But again, where does it go? Like, where does this go into here? It's just impossible to see what does what, how it's changing, what voltages are changing. Remember, I just called it. I said muting. Remember that. I'm on the right track. I'm just going to pull the whole front unit apart. I'm going to give all these switches a good clean. It just doesn't make any sense the way this thing's acting up. Because it really doesn't make a lot of sense that when it acts up, the levels go down right like they are now, right? I didn't think initially switches would be the issue though, because all the 4 channels go bad at the same time. But who knows? One switch that is common for all the playback circuits at once is the EQ switch, which is part of the tape selector switch. So I give them all a good cleaning. I'll give them a good shot of neutral. Speed selector switch. I'm thinking it might have been the speed selector, because the speed selector switch, if we look on this impossible to read schematic, speed selector switch here, which is impossible to read, also changes the EQ for the playback amplifiers. This is a unit that the owner of it went and recapped it themselves too. They changed every electrolytic cap in the unit. So, not saying they put one in backwards, but the boards aren't marked, so we could be looking at an owner-caused problem. I'm not saying that's what it is, but the owner of it did change all the caps. Then they dropped it. They brought it to me initially because of the problem with that connector on the back, which I hot wired, and then they went and undid my work. So I don't know whether they've caused the problem themselves or whether there's just something else that's intermittent on it. But all I know is that I've spent the better part of a day on this unit. So it's been about 40 minutes I've left this thing run, and we've lost sensitivity again. If I go to the that's the sync record, and then the separate playback head. Now if I actually touch them I get deflection, but I should be getting a lot more than that. I've put my loop tape back on again, a bit shorter now because I broke it, but I say this tape's pretty much worn out because it's been running pretty much non-stop for hours and hours and hours. I'll just let this thing play, and we'll see the meters when I do this. Stop the recording, of course. It cuts out for a second because of the gap between the record and play head, but we'll just let this thing loop here while I have dinner. And after giving these switches a thorough cleaning, see if it'll continue to play. Thing is, when it cut out on all the channels at the same time. So something that's common to all of them, and the only thing that's common to all of them, other than the power supply, is the EQ switch. That's the only thing that's common. You got a common power supply and you got a common EQ switch to change the equalization settings for the different speed. Other than that, everything's independent. You've got independent circuit boards on this for a playback, right? You got a front and you got a rear circuit board. And on those, there's independent circuits for each of those. So it's the fact that it's affecting all four channels, something that's common to all four. It's either going to be power supply, and the power supply, the voltages aren't appearing to change on what I've checked. I haven't checked the voltage going into the playback amp, and that'll be the next thing if I have to get into that. That's why also with the tape a little shorter, I can lay this thing on its side and actually probe the board on the bottom, because you can't do that when there's a reel on it. It'll hit. So only really need one reel for doing this anyway, just to hold the tape into position. The other one can just run stabilized. So anyway, I'll let this thing run while I have dinner. We'll see if this thing still runs. I've spent the entire day on this. I started on this yesterday, so you can imagine how frustrating this one gets, because when you get an intermittent problem like this that takes 45 minutes to even show its ugly head, anything you do, you got to test it for another 45 minutes to an hour, and just simply stopping it and starting it back up. So if you're playing a tape and the tape gets to the end and you haven't caught it by the end of the tape, well, you got to start over again. So it means you have to use a long tape and hope it acts up. That's why I went with the loop, so that they can just leave this thing play constantly, and we'll see what happens. All right, this thing's faded right out here. Let's just see whether my theory is right. Is it a switch problem? So I'm just going to start by fiddling around with the EQ switch here and see if the levels come back. So we'll just switch this a few times and see if anything comes back. And then we'll flick this switch over here. I know the record light's on. It's not in the record mode because it's not armed for record. But we'll do this switch. Interesting. Okay, so that's the speed switch. So when I flick the speed switch without stopping it, if I stopped it, of course it would come back. When I flick the speed switch up and down, it got it to work. So something's going on in that switch, where it switches equalization somehow. The problem is, where the speed switch is right where they've overlapped two sections of the schematic, which really makes it a bitch to try to read what's going on and chase circuits when it is so bloody hard to read this thing. Okay, so I got this thing tracked down now. It appears to be a muting problem. it looks to me that this wire goes all the way through up to here. Although when I put my meter on it, it's like that wire is, it's like it's open. I mean, it traces back from there to here. Now it goes out completely. I wonder. That's this wire should go all the way through, tracing it back from pin 2. I mean, I've spent literally all goddamn day on this thing. So we have, with my poor quality print from the poor quality scans, just bear with me here. Okay, coming off of the system control board, we have a muting line. It's, zoom in on this thing. So we have a muting line right there. It says muting right on it. And that's a muting signal that gets sent out from the system control circuit. And that says it goes to CN502 to CNP502. CNP502 is going to be this one right there. And you can see the muting line is number 2. You got pin 1 is ground, pin 2 is muting, pin 3 is something else, 4 and 5 are open, and the other 3 at the other end are open. And that is this one right here. So I have a red with a blue stripe, and I have a red with a blue stripe there. I went to measure for continuity on this wire, and I have resistance. I have quite high resistance on here. So this is it here. Red with the blue, red with the blue. I had I'm in diode test mode, but that should be like dead short. Put it in ohms mode, and this line here is it's got some voltage on it. I mean, it should be dead short. If I disconnect it on the muting line itself up here, so we'll just take that one off. This wire should go all the way through. See, I've been pulling my hair out on this buddy thing all day because it's just been such a pain in the ass. This wire should be, but it's not. And it's like, what the hell is going on with this wire? Is this wire broken somewhere? Is it damaged? Or is it not that wire? But it's gotta be. This has got to be the plug. But I'm pretty sure this is the one, ground, and this one here, this is the muting wire. And it should be connected to this. And then when I put my meter on there in diode test mode, which is applying a bit of a voltage, the sound comes back and it kills it. So I think this wire is damaged somewhere between here and where it gets up to here, because it comes down through this wiring harness here. You know, this wire comes all the way down here. This is it here. Where is it? This is it here. We'll just pull this stupid wire out if I can. I don't want to cut any of these harnesses, but we'll see where it goes. This is it here. Comes along here. I mean, they did a great job of lacing this up, that's for sure. And it's going to end up coming all the way along here and ending up down here. I know it. Give me this one right down there. Should be that one there. Or does it end up on here? It might end up on this side of the plug. You know that? It might end up on this side. Let's just see if it's on this one. Maybe it's the plug that's fucked. Could be the plug that's screwed. Wouldn't be the first time that there's been one of these bloody connectors that have gone bad. And that would give me resistance. Let me just, let's just see if it comes up to this one. Pull that back if I can. My meter. I'm getting voltage measuring on this wire. It's interesting. I mean, it should be a dead short across here. I'm sure this wire is the one that's coming up here. You see, it's not. It's like it's open. That's red-green on this side. This is red-blue on this side. This is the one. This is the wire. Red with a blue stripe, right? White, red, blue. White, red, blue. This is the wire that comes along here. However it gets there. It goes this way. This is in here. That's definitely it there. Where the hell is it going? This is, I hate these things. Just the way they've bundled all these wires together. You can't see anything. I don't want to cut all these straps out either because it's so nice and neatly bundled. But this wire is coming along here. And it's got to be this one, but how does it get there? Is it going to another connection first? I'm just wondering, because it doesn't show on here that it's going anywhere else first. I'm just going to let this thing run until it goes quiet again. I get a sneaking suspicion that there's another connection between here and up here. It goes somewhere else first, maybe to one of the connectors on the back side of the playback cards, because they're connected in parallel. But somewhere along the line, I've got it nailed down to the mute. So let me just let this thing run until it fades out. There's a wire that's open somewhere between there and here. It may go to another connection that's bad in here, or another plug. There could be another connector in there, though it doesn't show. It shows this one on the schematic. This is what shows. This side looks like it goes up to, this is a red-green, and this one goes up into, looks like it goes up into this bundle here. Is that green or red? No, that's red and white. But you see, it does mute when the speed changes. That's what it does. Is it when you change the speed. So if I monitor the voltage on here and I flip the speed, this should jump momentarily because it does mute when you do a speed change. See? It mutes. So I get a sneaking suspicion that this is rising when it, and that's what's causing it to mute. It's a muting. I've been chasing thinking power supply problem all day, and it's actually a muting problem. Something's causing it to go into mute. Interesting. A real interesting fault. Very difficult to try to track down because the goddamn thing takes half an hour. You know, I gotta sit here and wait for half an hour before it acts up, which is what's making this thing. This has certainly been a challenge, and I've been on this thing all day. It's now like 10 o'clock at night, and I stopped for lunch and I stopped for dinner. I started on this yesterday. It's one of these maddening repairs. It drives you absolutely crazy. Okay, it's gotten quiet. Guess there any voltage on pin 2. There's 1.2 volt on pin 2. But there's nothing up here. Because that should be a direct connection to this. If that wire is going through as it should be. Let's just try putting a jumper wire in place here. That wire's open. Ha ha ha! I found it! Son of a bitch! That wire between here and that connector is open. Ha 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 ha! Let's put a permanent wire in place of that. Get this dog the hell out of here, because this one is a dog. It's barking. It's such a dog. I'm gonna do this hot. Everything here is isolated, by the way. My iron is isolated from power. My solder iron is isolated. This unit is isolated. Everything's on an isolation transformer. You would never do this on an energized unit if you weren't isolated. But everything I've got here is isolated. I've got an isolation transformer. The iron is isolated. It is not grounded. It's floating. The tip is floating. Everything here is on an isolated supply. So that's the only way you'd ever get away with doing this is if you were completely isolated. See, if I go up here and just put the wire up here to number 19. See? So we'll just throw this wire around here, and I'll leave lots of wires so I can kind of dress it after the fact. But this way I can prove that it's going to work. Because if I stop it, then of course I gotta wait forever to see if it's going to fix it. So this way I know I'm fixed in real time. There we go. Unbelievable. The amount of effort required on this goddamn thing, just because, well, it was mainly because it was such an intermittent fault, right? It was such an intermittent fault. It did not act up on a regular basis. So I don't care. It's ugly. It's going to stay like that. I'll put a few zip ties around here, but now how that wire went open is anyone's guess. This one here, this machine was recapped by the customer themselves. So I would think that probably it got damaged when they had boards and stuff out and were pulling boards out to change the capacitors. That's likely where the wire got damaged. But somewhere on this wire here, this white with the red and blue that comes from there and goes to there, it's open. So somewhere along the line that wire has been damaged. Either it's nicked or it's stretched or it's failed. Anyway, I'm turning it down here. Anyway, that's got this one running, so we'll just kind of tuck these wires out of the way and kind of zip them down so that they're not going to get onto anything. And then I'm going to put this dog to bed. Hopefully to never ever see it again. I ain't making any money on this one because I had to go and buy new printers so I could print out the schematic, because my old Samsung printer finally has bit the dust after 18 years of operation. I'll be doing a video on it, I'm sure, at some point. We'll take the Samsung printer and take it apart and see why. I think the drum is probably worn out on it, or the transfer belt. It's a color laser printer with both sides printing. So it's a nice printer, and I'd like to get it going. I'd like to fix it, but anyway, let me throw this thing together now that we've got the problem resolved finally. To say that this one was a challenge, not so much a challenge, it was just because of the nature of how intermittent it was and how long it had to run before it actually showed the fault. That's what really made this one a bit of a challenge was just because, you know, you just, simple thing like just stopping it and starting it up again, and it'd be fine for half an hour, right? So simple thing like changing the tape speed, right? Simple thing like that, and you'd have to wait another half an hour. And these connectors that are always problematic on these, you have to always consider that a connector may be broken, switches could be bad, so many things could cause weird problems. And this one here, as I say, it was a bit of a pain in the ass to work on. Anyway, let's throw this one together. The bezel goes back on. At least all the switches are all clean now. I'm going to run this on some tests some more before I put it into the cabinet. Put the head cover and everything back on, and we'll just let it play. And let it go for a few hours. Well, it's 11:46 at night. This thing's been going for a couple of hours, and it's still whistling away. Therefore, it's fixed. I'm just going to throw the back on it now so that I can get it out of here. There we go, all back together. I'm going to leave this run overnight. Just let this wear this loop tape right out completely. I'll have a pile of brown oxide all over the heads in the morning, and the tape itself will be pretty much shot anyway. If it's still playing the note in the morning, I'll know for sure that the problem's solved. But I know the problem's solved now anyway, because it played longer than it ever had up until that point. So we're good. This one's done. Owner's not going to be happy when they get the bill for this one, but that's what it costs sometimes to fix these things, when you have to spend hours and hours and hours troubleshooting, and then have to deal with the likes of schematics, which are just a disaster to try to follow, because when they were scanned, they were not scanned as well as they could have been. I mean, I've seen worse, but this is pretty bad. You can't read half the numbers. Even zooming in on it, you can't see half the numbers on here. And I did have to go buy a new printer, because my old printer just, I mean, the quality of it was even worse. My old printer, as I say, was kind of a disaster. 18 years old. Pretty worn. I'll be doing a service video on that soon. It's a color laser with both side printing, so a big brute. So we'll be taking that thing apart and seeing if I can make it print any better. It might just need a good cleaning. It's been turned on and never shut off. It's been running 24 hours a day for 18 years. It just goes to sleep, right? Anyway, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Bye.